When the Han Dynasty came to power after the fall of Qin, it ended up relying on some of the legalist structures the Qin Dynasty established, but also made Confucianism one of China's great philosophical traditions, really the backbone of Chinese society. So while the government did use some of the legalist background from the Qin Dynasty, including its organization and strict centralization, it also really relied on Confucianism. Confucian scholars became the most important advisors in the Han Dynasty and really became a class in and of themselves. As a way to reflect some of the important ideals of Confucianism, China eventually developed what's called the civil service exam. So one of the key ideas of Confucianism, you might recall, is meritocracy, the idea that people can earn their way up in society and into government positions. So it became law that everyone in China who wanted to work for the government had to take this long exam called the civil service exam. It covered all sorts of topics: taxation, mathematics, history, Confucianism, and everyone, no matter what class they were, was allowed to take this test and had to take the test if they were to work for the government. They'd enter one of these booths, and the test would last actually up to 3 days, covering all these various topics. And there's strict secrecy around the test takers and graders so that no one would really know who was taking or giving the test. The whole idea was to eliminate corruption. It was great in theory, and it actually ended up lasting all the way until the end of the Qing Dynasty in China's Imperial period in 1912. But one of its limits was that really to prepare for this test, you had to hire the best and most expensive tutors in China. So in theory, this was very equal and allowed anyone to work for the government. But in practice, it was still really limited to the upper class. To control the economy, the Han Dynasty developed government monopolies over certain goods. So a monopoly is where one group controls the trade and production of a particular item. In this case, the Han government took monopolies over many different areas: ironworking, silk making, paper making. The idea was the government would be able to control the production of these goods, and ended up making the government a lot of money, but also help regulate trade. And the Han Dynasty did have a lot of innovations during its time. One of those was the making of paper. Before the Han Dynasty, the Chinese government recorded everything on strips of wood. Paper, once it became widespread, was much cheaper and easier to make. And so you really saw an explosion of record keeping in China under the Han Dynasty. The Han social structure was really modeled after Confucianism. It didn't look that different from other social structures we see: the emperor and government officials and landowners at the top. But one thing you might notice that peasants actually are fairly high up on the social ladder. The idea came from Confucian scholars who noted that peasants really had a rough position in life, but they were very important. They produced all the food that people ate, and since Confucianism valued hard work, peasants were ranked fairly high in the social system, and they often weren't taxed very much. Meanwhile, merchants are rather low. Now, merchants in Confucianism are seen as really not contributing much to society. They take things that other people make or grow, and then they sell them for a profit. So Confucian scholars advised that merchants be placed fairly low, and they were heavily taxed and regulated. At the same time, trade was extremely important to China. The Han Dynasty traded along the Silk Road, and the merchant class was really key to China's economic success.